Okay, so we are going to be reviewing today. Today's all about review, and what we're going to be looking at is all the past shurim. So that's the idea. I'm not 100% sure we're going to be able to get through it all. I thought maybe we would, but then when I was putting the source sheets together and then trying to cut out sources to only get like one or two per shear, I realize that's still a tremendous amount of material to cover. So we'll have to see in terms of how we're able to accomplish it all. But we'll see. We'll go 45 minutes, see how far we get. Okay. So the most important thing that we saw was the first thing that we went through, because that referred to the laws of the svara, right? It was when the first year that we went through, the first sugya was how we developed the svara about what the nature of Birchas and mitzvahs and what it was, and then we were able to take that svara and basically apply it to everything else that we were doing, right? So every other sugya that we saw, we basically hoped that it fit into the svara. If it hadn't, then we'd have to go back and start afresh. So that was the idea. So the first sugya that we saw was this Rambam in Halachaos brachas that said that just as we make a bracha on hana, so too we make a bracha on mitzvos. And we were trying to figure out exactly how the connection is made when the Rambam says like ukishem, like just as you make a bracha on brachas brachos of things you're going to get benefit from, so too on mitzvos. So what does that mean that that they're both you have them both? So that was our question. So that's how we were trying to understand it. And what we said was we took our salvation's approach that brachas hamitzvos are a like a matir, they're a license, right? And since they're a license, so that's where we try to basically say, try to figure this out. We're trying to say this. Let's start again. That the brachas mitzvah is a license to do a mitzvah, just like a brachas hanenin is a license to do to get benefit from this world. So too, a brachas mitzvah is a license to do a mitzvah. That was the Soloveitchik's explanation of the Rambam's approach. The Ritva had a totally different approach to it. And the Ritva said that most mitzvahs could be looked upon as just a regular action. There's nothing really that screams mitzvah about them, right? I sit on my porch, which has a pergola on top of it and call it a sukkah. A week before that, it was just a pergola. Today, all of a sudden, it becomes a sukkah. So who's to say that it's a mitzvah? So it demonstrates the fact that it's a mitzvah is the Birchas mitzvah. By reciting a Birchas mitzvah, so then what I'm doing in essence is I'm declaring it a mitzvah. So you have a good machlokas between the Rambam and the Ritva. So what we tried doing was saying, okay, yes, there's a definite machlokas between the two of them. The Rambam is viewing it as a license to partake of the mitzvah, and the Ritva is looking at it as a demonstration that your act is, or a declaration that your act is a mitzvah, right? So that's two different approaches. Well,
do we have a question? Why would you think that you need a license or a bracha to do a mitzvah? Torah says do a mitzvah, do the mitzvah.
So why is a different question. It's definitely a good question. I have an approach to it, but that's more of a philosophical question. Because why you would need it?
Why isn't it also mechanical? Because why would you think that you need a matir? The Torah says do the mitzvah.
It's not a question whether you would think you need a matir. It's clear that that's what's happening here. In other words, the difference between asking a mechanical question and asking a philosophical question really begins with why. Because if you're asking why, so then that's you're asking the philosophy behind the mitzvah. If you're asking, okay, what is happening here, right? Well, what is this brachas mitzvah that I'm making? So the way the Rambam approached it, I would assume, is the Rambam said, okay, what was it that I was allowed to do beforehand or not allowed to do that I am allowed to do? What's the difference between before I make the bracha and after I make the bracha? So the Gemara in brachos, when it talks about brachas hanenin, is like straight out says we're not allowed to get benefit from any physical thing in this world. unless you make a bracha. Once you make a bracha, then you're allowed to get benefit from it. So that's clear. So then the Rambam, when the Rambam uses the word ukashem, so then Rav Soloveitchik says, okay, so it must be that the Rambam is seeing them as the same thing. Right now, it's true. I might think to myself, well, that's crazy, right? Kadosh Baruch Hu commands me to do the mitzvahs. What would be the purpose of a matir? Okay, that's a different question. That's true. It's a very good question, but it's almost impossible to separate the fact that the Rambam does use this word kashem. So if he's using the word kashem, so then he's saying the same thing, and which leads us to say that it must be either we've got brachas and that and all wrong, which I mean it's very hard to read the Gemara any other way, or we have the kashem wrong. But the kashem is a kashem all across the Rambam. Whenever he uses that word, he's saying just as. And the thing that he said before was you had to make a bracha, and he says kashem shemavarchem alana kach mavarchem kol mitzvah mitzvah. So if you want to say that it's so ludicrous to say that you have to have a license to do a mitzvah, so then you're going to have to go back and explain this Rambam in a different way. I don't know how you would do that. But that's definitely the burden on reading the Rambam in a different way. It's almost
does it sound ridiculous to say what would the Rambam say? When did brachos come into? When did they originate? Before, at Har Sinai, when people put on tefillin, did they make a bracha?
Most probably not.
So at the convention of the Chazal,
Ashigenes said, yeah, but that it becomes a whole question because if you I don't like taking historical approaches to halacha, but you'd have to, there is like when the Gemara discusses the source for or the rationale for making a bracha before you eat. So the Gemara has a debate about whether or not it's a svara, and how could you not make a bracha before you eat? How could you not recognize God? And or whether or not it's a institution of Chazal. So it could be that just the text of the bracha was created by, but everybody would do something before. They would do some sort of a recognition of a hecker of a demonstration beforehand. So that's So I don't like the approach of let's see what the history of it before was, because I don't think it's gonna lead us anywhere that's gonna help us. But that's okay. So now you have a machlokas between the Ritva and the Rambam in terms of what is this Birchas mitzvah? Is it a license or is it a declaration? When the move that we made was we said, okay, let's find a common denominator between the Rambam and the Ritva. Because what do they definitely agree on, right? What do they agree on? They could separate at a certain point, but what is it that they agree on? And then with that understanding, we can then have a somewhat broad umbrella-based understanding of a Birchas mitzvah. And the one thing that we saw that they did have in common was that this was a demonstration. There was some sort of demonstration, a verbal demonstration. They both agreed to that. The question is, what was the purpose of, or what was the objective of this verbal demonstration? Was it as a license, or was it as sort of a declarative statement that gave a nature to the action that you were about to do? That was the debate, but it was definitely a declaration of sorts. And then the question became, okay, so what is the declaration doing? So then we saw this Sefer Hamitzvos, right? That was the Sefer Hamitzvos that talked about Yiras Hashem, and talked about the fact that the Yiras Hashem is something that imbued itself in mitzvos, right? And that's the idea that a mitzvah needs this Yiras Hashem. So okay, so that's very nice, but where do you see that, right? Where do you see it? So then that's where I wanted to say that what the Birchas HaMitzvah is doing is it's a declaration of it's a declaration that imbues each and every one of our mitzvahs with this Yiras Hashem. So when it comes to the Rambam is going to say you need a license because just doing a mitzvah without Yiras Hashem is I don't know what word it's not the way it's supposed to be done, right? So that's what you'd say. That's not the way that a mitzvah is supposed to be done, and therefore you need to imbue your mitzvahs with Yiras Hashem. You do that by by making sure you have a license to partake of the mitzvah. And the Ritva would come along and say that no, what it is instead is that you in order to have the Yiras Hashem imbued inside the mitzvah, your Yiras Hashem in the mitzvah, it has to be done by making a declaration that that this act is something that I'm using as part of my Yiras Hashem. That's the idea. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
would you say then the Rambam would say the bracha for, I think Nama was the word, would also be for Yiras Hashem purposes?
I don't know. It's a good question. If now you work it backwards, does the kashem
Right.
work backwards? Right.
Right.
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I want to think about that because I don't know if your eating has to have Yiras Hashem. That's the difference. A mitzvah, it makes sense to say it needs Yiras Hashem. Somebody eating, I don't know if that really requires Yiras Hashem so much.
And so would that be problematic with the kashem if they were?
I don't think so because I think that the kashem could be just like demonstrative, and as it only goes so far. Yeah, that's what I would say the difference is.
Okay.
So yeah. Okay. So that was our first. So yeah, and that was that was the major svara that we used then to look at all other.
Getting back to Scott's
Yes, sir.
point for just a second.
Yeah.
Is it too philosophical to say that everything in your life should be done with Yiras Hashem?
So that's definitely a philosophical idea, and it's definitely a true idea, right? That Yiras Hashem has to be imbued in everything. But the question is, what's the nature of Yiras Hashem when you say, because there's halachic Yiras Hashem and then there's philosophical Yiras Hashem, right? There's a mitzvah of Yiras Hashem, and then there's philosophical Yiras Hashem. Those are two separate things. And there's Musar Yiras Hashem and Chassidish Yiras Hashem. It depends on how you are saying Yiras Hashem. When we're saying Yiras Hashem in terms of a halachic sense, it's a sort of awareness that when you're doing a mitzvah, that this action that I'm doing is a mitzvah. Because I'm saying that this is a mitzvah, and I recognize the fact that the nature of the mitzvah is that it's connected to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the idea. So for the Rambam, I'm going to need a license to partake of that, and for the Ritva, I'm going to have to declare that I'm actually involved in this beforehand. But I think the Yiras Hashem that you're referring to is more philosophical in terms of the decisions that I make. The Rambam has a tshuva where he discusses on a definitely philosophical sense, but he says that that every decision that we make is really an expression of our Yiras Hashem, right? That there's no decision, no matter how mundane it seems to us, is not an expression of our Yiras Hashem. And there, what the Rambam means is it's an expression of our values. As if we're putting the mitzvahs of the Kadosh Baruch Hu ahead of our as the primary deciding factor. So in the decisions that we make, so no matter how mundane the decision is, it's going to boil down to Yiras Hashem. But that's more on a philosophical sense. Okay. Okay. So the next thing that we saw was the idea of brachos opening and closing with a bracha. Right, that all brachos, the brachos themselves have to have an opening and a closing to the bracha, right? And we saw that the Rashba explained that the starting and ending with the same idea is a greater praise of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? And so we explained it as this halacha that brachos should be kulan posech b'barach v'chosein b'barach, right? There are exceptions to the rule. There's a lot of exceptions to the rule. It seems almost that there are more exceptions to the rule than when the rule itself applies. But we understood that brachos that are constructed symmetrically or that brachos are constructed symmetrically, opening and closing of the bracha, so that they reflect praise of God both in content and in construct. Right? That's how we understood this halacha. Right? So an opening and closing with a bracha. And they're all the same idea. So that's the bracha being constructed symmetrically, right? It's creating almost like a pleasing aesthetic to the wording, right? So that symmetrical aesthetic, that's a greater praise of a Kadosh Baruch Hu because the construct is created to create an impression. So that's how we explain this halacha that all brachos should open and close with a bracha itself. Okay, then we looked at the next topic, right? The next halacha was that mitzvahs that are similar, that are obligatory, and mitzvahs that are similar to optional, and we don't make a bracha on all of them. So the Rambam wrote that a person has to make a bracha on a mitzvah, whether the mitzvah is obligatory or it's what the Rambam called domel reshus, right? Which domel reshus was a mitzvah sort of like mezuzah or makkah. You don't have to own a house in your lifetime, right? There's no obligation to owning a house. So I die and having never fulfilled the mitzvah of mezuzah, right? Because I lived on a ship or I lived on a tent in my entire life, right? So then I never had to have a mezuzah. That's no problem. But for instance, tefillin, there's no way I could go a day without having put on tefillin. I'm not exempt, right? So I have to. So that's a chov. Okay. So then we wanted to know, the Rashba had pointed out that there are many mitzvahs that we don't make a bracha on, right? So how could this be that all brachos you have to make a bracha on? So we went through the Rashba. We mentioned how the Rashba has like a list of 20 different mitzvahs that there's no bracha on. So we went through 5 of them, right? But the main principle that the Rashba used to explain was the fact that there was no principle, right? And that was the most shocking thing, because it's not a usual thing you see in the Rishonim, where the Rishonim say there's no overarching svara here. Each one is on its own, is its own example, right? And that's where the Rashba said, because they asked him about one of the mitzvahs. So he said, "Tshuva zu she'ela muka, v'davar sha'amdu alav rishonim zatzal." Right, so it says there was always a big tumult about which brachas you make a bracha, which mitzvahs you make a bracha, and which ones you don't. He says, the thing doesn't depend on one reasoning. They give one reasoning across the board for everything. So we explained the Rashba, and we explained that certain mitzvahs, we used our first svara. And we said that certain mitzvahs don't require a bracha because those mitzvahs don't lend themselves to being fulfilled in a casual manner, right? So since the brachos by nature are going to have Yiras Hashem imbued in them, so we don't have to worry about that, and they didn't need a bracha. So each case, it's true that each case in its own has its own reasoning to it. Each mitzvah that doesn't have a bracha has its own reasoning to it. But the way we understood it is that the unique reasoning to each mitzvah is a unique reasoning why you don't have an issue of fulfilling it in a casual manner. But the overarching principle is that these mitzvahs are would not lend themselves to a casual manner, and then we'd have to go ahead and explain, well, how come what about this particular mitzvah doesn't lend itself to a casual manner? What about this particular mitzvah doesn't lend it to a casual manner, and so on and so forth. Okay, then we had as follows. Then the next thing we had, the next sugya that we saw was Birchas al mitzvahs shehem b'divrei sofer. Right, we had the famous machlokes about whether or not you make a bracha on mitzvahs that are midirabanan, right? So we said, the Rambam says that whether or not the mitzvah midirabanan is obligatory or not obligatory, you still make a bracha on it, right? The question coming from, how could you say the words Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvoso v'tzivanu if God didn't command us in this, but rather the Rabbanan commanded us, right? So how could you make a bracha? And the Rambam's logic was that God commanded us to listen to the Rabbanan. So since God commanded us to listen to the Rabbanan, so we are fulfilling, even though this particular action God didn't say, right? But he said that you have to fulfill the mitzvahs. Okay. So according to the Rambam, right, all violations of a rabbinic command violate the Torah command of lo sasor, right? And the Ramban disagreed with that. Right, the Ramban strongly felt that we don't find Chazal calling Derabanan a violation of Lo Sasar. He brought proofs for that, right? So, for instance, he brought a proof that you should have when you violate a Derabanan, the halacha is that you get what's called makas mardos. You get lashes. You get lashes for if you're violating the rabbinic commands. But you only get what's called makas mardus. You only get makas midarabanan. But if you're violating a Torah command, then you should get lashes from a Torah perspective. Why is it that you're only getting from derabanan? So that was one of his another proof that he had was that we have derabanans go kula, right? We're lenient on a suffix derabanan. When we have a suffix about whether or not I'm obligated in the midst of derabanan, so we're usually lenient on it. So wait a minute, hold on a second. If every derabanan is really a daraisa, so then I should be machmir on it because it's really a daraisa. So how could you say there's a difference? That was the Ramban's proofs against the Rambam's opinion, right? And we gave the svara that a mitzvah derabanan can be looked upon as not as crucial as a mitzvah daraisa, and therefore it doesn't require anything to stop them from being fulfilled in a casual manner, right? So no, but then we said, right? There's an argument to be made then, and this seems to be what the halacha is, that more than daraisa, a rabbanan actually needs the bracha because since you might think it's more makil, it lends itself to a casual manner, and therefore it really does need a bracha. Okay, then we went on to the next sugya, which was interesting, is brachas on the category of sakana, right? So we talked about that that there is a category in halacha called sakana, danger, right? And whether or not we do not make a bracha on this category, right? So we said that a Birchas Hamitzvos is made before a mitzvah, but not every command that we have is a mitzvah. And our question was, hold on a second, you said that mitzvah derabanans get a bracha, right? So it's the Rabbanan tell us you gotta wash before you eat bread, and then I'm going to make a bracha on that washing. And now the rabbis come along and tell me I have to make a bracha after I eat bread, right? So what's the difference? The rabbis told me to wash my hands in both cases. So for the first case, I need a bracha, so I need a bracha in the second case also. What's the difference? So he said that no, sakana is not a mitzvah. And therefore, since it's not a mitzvah, when the rabbis instituted it, they instituted it as midin sakana, not as a mitzvah. And therefore, you do not make a bracha when Chazal did not legislate the law as a mitzvah. Okay, so then you say, well, what makes something a mitzvah? What doesn't? So if my machorim had a kiyum, so then it would be an actual mitzvah and it would require a bracha. Okay, so and that's why you saw that some of the Gaonim did hold that you make a bracha on my machorim because they felt there was a kiyum of kedusha. Right, that's what they felt. They felt that there was a kiyum of kedusha, and that's why they maintain that you do make a bracha on it. Okay. The next thing we had was the time that you make a bracha. Right. So the Rambam says that just like you make a bracha, right, on before the brachas and so too you make a bracha, what's called over l'asiyasan, before the mitzvah was created. Right. And the Rambam explained this idea of chazi that we saw in the Gemara by the ger, that the ger doesn't make the bracha before they go into the mikvah, right? The idea being that they're not worthy, they're not of making a bracha. And worthy is a backbite. Worthy seems like you have to earn it. It's not really worthy. They're not roi. They're not qualified yet to make a bracha, right? Because they're not sanctified. They're not Jewish yet. So and the svara that we gave is that the Birchas mitzvah is an oral declaration that prevents the casual approach to the mitzvah, right? It has to be said before the fulfillment of the mitzvah. That's the logic of Over L'Asiyasa, right? So, but there are opinions that allow a Birchas mitzvah at times to be recited even during or after the Birchas mitzvah, like the case of the ger, right? So we said that those opinions are saying that it's not that it has to be done necessarily before, the bracha doesn't have to be recited before the mitzvah, but rather as long as you still associate with the mitzvah. As long as you can make an argument that you associate with the mitzvah, so then that's still allowed, right? And that's the idea. So I can't make a mizonos when I'm walking in the street if I don't have any food in front of me, right? Because there's nothing that's really saying that I have to make a brachas mizonos. Right, that's the first rule of Hilchos brachas, right? But I need to, if I have the chetz of the mitzvah in front of me, if I have the object of the mitzvah in front of me, I can make an argument that I still associate. Now the Rambam wouldn't accept that argument, but there are Rishonim that do. We saw those Rishonim. Okay. The next thing that we
Rabbi, just one point on that.
sure.
So the ger, he could do it after he goes in the mikvah because he's still somehow connected to that process.
Correct.
So how is that different than, lighting the Chanukiah and then saying the bracha after that?
So it's interesting that you say that because while the Birchas Hamitzvos it's hard to it's a good question, as you would say that, let's say I light my Chanukiah and then I walk away, and then the Chanukiah is lit. So the question is, so am I still? I would venture to say, now this is a crazy thing that I'm saying, but I would almost bet on it that there's no way we could figure this out. But I would say that the Rambam would say both cases you're not allowed to. But I would say that it's almost assuredly that the opinions that hold that, let's say we saw by Shchita, I think we saw Trumas Adeshen by Shchita that allowed after the animal was slaughtered to still be able to say in the moments after the animal was slaughtered to still be able to say the bracha. I would posit that the Trumas Adeshen might, again, it's a small n here, might allow you to, within the first half hour of lighting Hanukkah candles, if you forgot to make the first bracha, which is the Birchas mitzvah, not the second and third brachas, which are praise, he would still allow you to make the bracha. Again, it's a guess, and I don't have any proof for it. My only proof is because he allowed it by Shchita, so maybe you should allow it here. The Rambam would not allow either of them.
Right. So it doesn't have anything to do with that. The ger has no opportunity to say the bracha prior, but with the Chanukiah you do, and you lost your chance.
Right.
You don't think that that plays into it, where the only opportunity for the ger is to do it post, but if you have the opportunity to do it before and you mess up, too bad, you can't do it after.
Right. So you're right. I don't remember how he explained why the ger is so different, why he's so unique.
Okay.
I don't remember that. I have to go back to the notes. Okay. The next thing we saw
If we can go back one moment to
Sure.
Sakana, the category of Sakana.
Sure.
The reason why a doctor or a surgeon wouldn't make a bracha before a life-saving event that he's about to perform is because it's Sakana, or because he's not sure what the outcome will be.
No, neither of them. I mean, I don't know. The second one is an interesting option, but the doctor is not performing surgery because of Sakana. The doctor is performing surgery because he has a mitzvah of saving someone's life. Right? So he has the skill. That's not there happens to be Sakana, but there's a mitzvah, don't stand by while your brother's blood is being shed. That's a doraisa. So that mitzvah wasn't instituted because of Sakana. That mitzvah was instituted by God. Right? That's one of the Taryag mitzvahs. When the doctor stands there, he's not saying that what I'm about to do is the exact same thing as that guy in the cafeteria is doing when he washes my machronim. He's right. The guy that's washing my machronim, you say, why are you washing my machronim? The rabbi said, it's dangerous. If I don't wash my machronim, so I'm going to wash my machronim. Say, the surgeon, what are you about to do now? The surgeon says, I was trained to have a certain set of skills. That guy's dying. I have the skills to be able to save him. There's a mitzvah losase of me standing by while I can't save him. So I'm going to have to go and save him. That's my mitzvah.
Why isn't he making a bracha?
So I'm not sure. It could be, you'd have to go through it. Well, first of all, he's not doing a mitzvah. He's not violating a losase. There's no mitzvah that he's doing. The prohibition
He's saving
is
the guy's life.
There's no mitzvah to save a guy's life, as crazy as that sounds. There's a mitzvah, right? You have a chiyuv that you can't stand by while your brother's blood is being shed. So I don't have right now. I'm sure there's some Jew dying somewhere in the world, right? That if I paid some money, I could save his life. So why am I not obligated to do that, right? Why am I not obligated to find the guy? Because I'm not. There's no chiyuv for me to do that, right? I don't have an obligation to go find the situation. But if I'm standing here and I see that guy in danger, then I have to go save him. Because that's lo sama bracha. I'm not aware of a mitzvah. I could be wrong. This could be like the most obvious thing in the world, and I'm getting it wrong. But I don't remember a mitzvah that says that you have to go ahead and save somebody. It's a positive command. I do know the losase of lo sama bracha, but I don't know of a mitzvah that says you have to go. You must save somebody's life. Because you violate a losase if you don't. I could be completely wrong on that, like, but I don't remember. And then if there is a mitzvah and I'm just forgetting something, then you're svara saying, okay, maybe it's because you don't know if you're going to be successful, right? So that makes sense. Then they would say, okay, you don't know if it's going to be successul. The Rashba had said that all mitzvahs that are dependent on somebody else, we don't make a bracha on, because then you don't know if the person's going to accept it. That's why he says we don't make a bracha on kibbut av or on staka, because the father can say, you know what, I'm not in the mood for the glass of water in the end, right? So then you have to drink it because I made a bracha, you know, like, and then staka, the guy could say that's not enough money for me, I don't want your staka, right? So then what do you do at that point, right? You made a bracha, it's a bracha levatala. So any mitzvah dependent on somebody else doesn't work. So you could go in and the doctor could be scrubbing up and he's about to start the surgery and then the patient dies, or he gets an infection, or the anesthesia doesn't take, you know, whatever it is, right? So and then he can't do it. So that could be why. I don't know, but I don't remember a mitzvah's assay to go ahead and save somebody's life. Okay. The next thing
Rabbi, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind if we don't finish it. So don't.
Okay, fine. Well, you had just mentioned something. I forgot the rabbi who said it. If somebody else is involved, you don't make a bracha.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we covered this. You know, when you separate for, you know, like the kohanim, you do make a bracha, correct?
Right. We make a there's two things. We make a bracha on the hafrashas, trumas, and maisos when we take it off. Like in my house, I take it off and then I make the bracha. But the Rashba said we don't make the bracha when I actually give it to the kohen.
Okay. Right. So my question, right. So you mentioned tzedakah, we don't say a bracha, like, so if you gave, you know, back in the day, like if you gave to like the Beis Hamikdash tzedakah, I mean, how could they not accept it? You know, so would you not even say a bracha at that point?
No, because the Beis Hamikdash is not a person. So that, the Beis Hamikdash is an entity. So when a makdish something, the Beis Hamikdash is going to take it no matter what. But
right. So then I was going to say, what if you give it like tzedakah to an entity that you know, like, you know,
we'll accept it. It's a good question.
Right.
Why would I give it to a shul? I make my donation to a shul or to a school. I don't make a bracha. That's a good question. So as you were talking, I thought of another question also. Is the Rashba had said this was a great idea. I love this idea. I booked a whole other shir on this idea on a philosophical level about the Rashba said we don't make a bracha when we give the kohen the money, right? Or his trumas and his maestros, not because it's not really you giving. The Rashba said that God essentially put the money in your hands to give it to the kohen, even though it came from my field and it came from my paycheck, right? So it was a fascinating idea. But the Rashba shouldn't have had to say that, because the Rashba could have just said, let's say the kohen says no, and he doesn't take it. So it's a mitzvah dependent on a just like staka. And it isn't staka, but it's just the same way. The kohen can say no. So why didn't the Rashba use that answer? Maybe because he wanted to make this point. You shouldn't think that maestros was really yours, that God was just giving it to you as a deposit. I don't know. So it's something to think about. Okay. So then we talked about that all mitzvos. So the bracha is said at the very end of the fulfillment of the mitzvah, right? So and if there's a mitzvah that has an action after the initial action, you only make the bracha at the last moment, right? At the last thing. So for instance, right, we don't make a bracha on building a sukkah. We only make a bracha when we actually sit in the sukkah, right? That was what the Rambam had said. So we explained that there's two parts to many mitzvahs. There's the manufacturing of the mitzvah and the fulfillment of the mitzvah. But because of the din of over lasiyasan, of making a bracha before doing the action, so you might think the bracha should be said as early as possible, even before the mitzvah is manufactured, or at least once it is manufactured. That's when that's the earliest point. But you actually recite the brachas on mitzvah before the fulfillment of the mitzvah, because that's when you need to have the yiras Hashem, and that fear of casual approach to the mitzvah is not for the action of the mitzvah, but it's for the kiyum ha-mitzvah, right? And that's why it's at the end part of the mitzvah that we go ahead and make the bracha. Okay, so that's okay. The next thing that we saw was the bracha of shechianu, and shechianu on a mitzvah. right? So we said that any mitzvah we said there's like three categories. That there's any mitzvah that's done from time to time, right? Like it appears annually on your calendar, like shofar or sukkah or lulav, something like that. And any mitzvah that requires purchasing something, like when you purchase tefillin, you purchase tzitzis, so they make a shechianu then as well. And then any mitzvah that isn't so frequent. It doesn't appear annually on your calendar, but it definitely doesn't appear frequently on your calendar. So that's like giving your son bris milah or pidyon haben, right? Those things don't happen all the time. Those happen very infrequently. So then you would make a shechianu on those three categories. So we explain that shechianu is a bracha on that's made when you achieve a level of simcha. So certain mitzvahs achieve so much simcha that a shechianu is obligatory, so as to mention a Kadosh Baruch Hu with the mitzvah, right? So we said that the happiness of achieving the mitzvah lasts as long as one is associated with the mitzvah. So there is one svara that generates a shechianu. It's simcha associated with a phenomena. The Rambam's three categories are three applications of simcha associated with a phenomena. So the difference between shechianu and other mitzvahs with a clear svara is that shechianu applies at different times at different places. Okay, that's the difference. These three, right? There's no like one time you make a shechianu. There's three different categories. But right, so a phenomena-based halacha isn't like other halachos where it's very clear that there's a simple principle that's happening, right? Because here it seems to be almost random as it applies. Right, these mitzvahs are random. They apply at random times throughout one's life. They're not like set times like tefillin, let's say, which is every single day, or wearing tefillin, I should say, which is every single day. Okay. Then we talked about doing mitzvahs for other people, right? And doing many mitzvahs at the same time. So the Rambam had brought up three halachos in three dinim in this halacha. He talked about performing a mitzvah for someone else and the brachas of mitzvah, performing a mitzvah for someone else and the bracha shechianu, and when there are multiple mitzvahs being fulfilled at once, right? So those were three different dinim that the Rambam had brought up in that halacha. So we talked about that the birchas of mitzvah is designed, right, to demonstrate that lack of casualness to mitzvahs. So the debate about whether or not to make one bracha on many mitzvahs, right? So if I have many mitzvahs sitting in front of me, I'm about to fulfill many mitzvahs at the same time. So the debate was, do I make one bracha for all of the mitzvahs, or do I only make so I say Asher the mitzvahs of Sakana al ha-mitzvahs, or do I make an individual bracha on each one? So we said that the Rambam said you make one on each one. So we said the idea is that whether combining mitzvahs under one bracha would still ensure yiras Hashem and fulfillment of that mitzvah. And so it seemed to be the answer was no, it wouldn't be sufficient. And every single mitzvah requires its own bracha. Okay. Then we had seen the sugya of girsas, the girsa of the bracha, the text of the bracha. Is it at the end, the chasima of the bracha, the signature, the end point of the bracha? Is it al ha-mitzvah or la asos ha-mitzvah, whatever mitzvah might be? So is it right al natilas lulav or lito lulav? Right, that was the question. What we had seen was the Rambam combines factors. Right, in a case where mitzvah is being done for him and others simultaneously. If you remember, he had like all this whole thing, right? And he said that the text al or le depends on whether the mitzvah is obligatory or not. But if it's not obligatory, it gets an al. If it is, if it right, so it gets if it's not obligatory, it gets an al. If it is, it gets a la. And there was a whole confusion. If you remember, there was like a whole big thing. And what we said was that there's two factors to determining the text of a brachas mitzvah. The first is whether the person is obligated the mitzvah or they're not obligated, and the second is whether the person is doing the mitzvah for themselves or for other people. Right. So the bracha as an oral declaration that states I'm about to do a mitzvah and then I'm going to do so with yiras Hashem. Right. So the text of the bracha has to reflect the purpose of that declaration, and therefore, first and foremost, it has to express lahaba. It has to express I'm about to do this in the future. But the text of the declaration changes whether the person is doing the mitzvah for themselves or for others, because then the nature of his association with the mitzvah is different if he's doing the mitzvah for himself or for other people, right? He associates with the mitzvah differently when he's being motzi somebody else or he's being motzi himself. So when he does the mitzvah for himself, the text reflects that he's commanded to do the mitzvah, litolas alulav, to take the lulav. But if it's for others, then the text reflects his association with the mitzvah, not with his command to do the mitzvah, but with the mitzvah in general. And therefore it's al, right? It's not about him fulfilling his mitzvah. It's about the mitzvah in general. So we are commanded in this mitzvah. And therefore, since we're commanded in this mitzvah in totality, I can therefore be motzi somebody else in the mitzvah. Okay, and then that would be al. Okay. So that's then we talk, right? So that's the idea. Okay, and then lastly, it's good we're just about done here. So the Rambam said that any minhag that doesn't have all minhagim, all things that Chazal instituted as a minhag, the same way Chazal instituted certain things as mitzvos, and they instituted certain things as sakana, and they instituted certain things as a siyag, right? So here they instituted certain things, but Torah's minhag. They said this is a minhag. So when they did that, we don't get there's no bracha recited on it, right? And we said that any mitzvah that you're not sure if you're obligated to do or not, you don't recite a bracha on. And we said that you should be careful to make as many brachas as possible, right? So we said that a brachas mitzvah is this declaration that I'm about to perform a mitzvah. But you got to make sure that what you're about to do is actually a mitzvah. So if it was a minhag, so then it wasn't a mitzvah. And therefore, I don't have to recite a bracha on it because I can't say that this is a mitzvah. So there was no takana. Then we talked about, if you remember, we had this big chiddush about making a bracha on a suffix, right? If I'm not sure if I'm obligated to do the mitzvah or not. So we said that generally, of course, you're going to stay away from making a bracha because you're going to say God's name in vain. But then we saw that language in the Chuvas Rambam about how the Rambam had said that that when it came to a case of doubt, the rabbis never instituted a bracha in those cases. So it's not that I'm just being overly cautious and I'm not saying God's name in vain, but in fact, when I would ask the rabbis, what bracha do I make on a bracha where there's a doubt as to whether or not I'm obligated in the mitzvah or not, the rabbis would say, no. Just like we never instituted a bracha on a minhag, so too we never instituted a bracha in a case of doubt. That's how they would explain it. And that is the review on 11 different sugyas of Birchas mitzvah. I didn't think it would take this long when I started going through it, but thank God it was very good. So Shkach, you're the two people that stuck around for the whole thing. So great. Okay, Bli Neder, next week we're going to have a 1 second, sorry. Next week we're going to have a